name is Mike Falk. I'm a professor of pediatrics and emergency medicine at Children's National Medical Center in GW, and I am the current president of the Sim Academy. I have been involved in this curriculum since we got started, and it's great to meet you guys.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Becca Burns. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Seattle Children's here in Washington. And I have been working to coordinate the production of the National Simulation Curriculum, Pediatric Emergency Medicine Curriculum for emergency medicine residents.
I'll go next. My name is Nguyen. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I run simulation for an emergency medicine program in Pennsylvania, and I'm also on the editorial staff of this curriculum.
This is Marc. I'll go next. Marc Auerbach. I'm one of the collaborative. This is sort of a pipe dream that I've had since probably about a decade ago. So really excited to see that we've gained some traction, and want to thank Sam Shahid, who has helped to guide a lot of the administrative aspects of this work, and really want to thank all of the people that have contributed to this work to date. I think that our long-term goal of improving outcomes is something that, based on the many hundreds of downloads that we've had already, hopefully we're moving closer to. And if we look at this work, I wanted to highlight that our team decided early on to take sort of the long tail with this, that the marathon was where we were going and not the sprint, that this was not about creating yet another set of pediatric cases, but this was about hopefully getting a standardized curriculum that residency program directors would agree to implement, that would be feasible to implement, and that hopefully over time through national implementation, we could demonstrate moving the needle on patient outcomes.
Thanks, Marc. So, I mean, really quickly, Becca's going to take over here. This is just introduction. So we introduced ourselves, wanted to say hi. From here, Becca is going to basically give a summary of the curriculum and show you guys an example of the case and how to use it. After that, we're going to briefly discuss possibility for collaborations and how we'd like to move forward with this. And then what we'd ideally like to do is we'll open it up for Q&A at the end, and we should have a bunch of time left over to hopefully answer everyone's questions. So without any further ado, I will let Becca take it over and introduce the curriculum to everyone.
Great, thank you. So if you have questions or comments, feel free to ask or put them in the chat, and maybe Michael, if you can monitor the chat since I can't see that. I'm also going to apologize. My office has like air conditioning blowing on me, and I'm in Seattle, so it is completely unnecessary. Sorry if you hear the air conditioning or if I start chattering here, but I am super excited to hopefully get my slides to work. And we just talked a little bit about that. So I'm just going to go an overview of sort of what we did and what we have to share with you today, and then where we would hopefully like to go from here. But I'm going to just start with our patient. So as most of you probably know, most pediatric patients are actually cared for in general emergency departments. About 85% of children who seek emergency care do so within general emergency departments. So they're really being cared for by the graduates of our EM residency programs. And the ACGME recognizes that graduates from residency need to be able to care for acutely ill children and children who've been the victims of trauma. But as we all know, there's a really big difference in exposure to acutely ill and acutely injured pediatric patients. Even within pediatric emergency medicine departments, the number of procedures or very sick children that someone might encounter in a year can vary widely. And there's been studies showing that EM residents have a pretty varied experience when it comes to seeing different diagnoses and different procedures. So with that in mind, Marc had this thought, it sounds like many years ago now, to create something that would really help provide a standardized experience for our emergency medicine residents. And they're really the target audience of this project. So the initial goal was to develop some goals, objectives, and really kind of a roadmap for a standardized pediatric emergency medicine simulation curriculum that could be distributed in a free, easy to access way. with the ultimate goal of implementing that so that residents are getting a standardized education with the ultimate goal of really improving care for our pediatric patients. And doing that by optimizing emergency medicine education and having to rely a little bit less on the variability of the child who's just walking into the emergency department. So to start this all off, and I'm so excited to see Jennifer on the call too, because she was the lead on this. So this began with a modified Delphi study to really identify what we should be teaching with simulation in terms of pediatric emergency medicine. And so we started with a huge list of possible topics that had actually been identified as important content in a previous modified Delphi study, and then broke that down into what we should be doing with simulation. So ultimately, we had members from all 10 of the organizations who are part of this collaborative nominate participants from those organizations. We ended up having 73 total participants, and what I can't believe is 98% completed all 3 surveys. I feel like that's unheard of and really speaks to our friends being invested in this project. And they were asked to rank things with either definitely must, possibly could, should, or should not teach these elements with simulation. And what we ended up with was a list of 30 topics and 26 procedures that were classified as must be taught with simulation. This is just an example of some of the categories and content that we came up with. I'm gonna quickly check the chat and see if I'm missing anything here. Okay, people are putting in their contact information. And so with those in mind, we formed a team of associate editors, myself and Marc, and mapped those content items to initially 15 simulation cases. We were able to map all 30 of the topics, and about 19 out of 26 of the procedures made sense to map to the cases. So then we came up with this really scheduled plan with the ultimate goal of inviting authors from across the country to write cases, working with the associate editors and myself to fine tune those. And then each case was going to go through an iterative peer review process where it would be tested at a different site with emergency medicine residents. We would get feedback from both the facilitators and the residents. The authors would use that information to then fine tune, tweak, and be ready for the next peer review. And it was a pretty tight timetable, and people were really excellent about jumping in and moving this along until that happened. But amazingly, we actually made it through all of round 2 peer reviews. There was a little bit of a delay with round 3, but ultimately most cases were tested at least 3 sites. Some sites, such as Marc at Yale, jumped in and tested a few of them by virtual cases as well. But I was just really amazed at every peer reviewer, every author, every associate editor's ability to really try to stay on track and work around this situation that we had been given. Authors, it was really important to us that this curriculum was developed broadly with representation from across the country, different programs, different types of programs. And so we made an effort to really make sure that it wasn't just, a couple of people at a couple of sites doing all the writing and testing. Ultimately, we ended up with 27 authors from 16 sites. Each case had between 1 and 3 authors, and the one case that had 3 authors is because it was about neonatal resuscitation and delivery. And the team astutely felt like they needed a neonatologist to really help tidy that case up. As for peer reviewers, the cases were tested at 36 sites across the country, and you can see a very large geographic variation there, as well as differences in sizes, whether programs are housed with pediatric emergency medicine or emergency medicine. And ultimately, as the cases were tested, we got 51 surveys back from instructors and over 280 learner surveys for all the cases. And almost all of those were from EM residents, about 250 surveys back from EM residents. Cases were also tested with a few medical students, nurses, a couple of PIM fellows, as well as some PEDS residents as well. So pretty robust groups of people who participated in the cases and really provided valuable feedback as to the reality of the case, whether the medical management was something that was more generalizable and not really institution specific, as well as making sure that we had all the supporting documents that we could potentially have. So I'm just going to pause there with the development piece and see if anybody had any questions or anybody wanted to add anything to that before moving on.
Becca, the only thing that I would add is that SIM is a instructional design, as most of you know, instructional technique, as most of you know, that the procedural piece certainly is something that did come up, and we've layered it into many cases, could be expanded. The objectives that were not best taught with SIM are not something that we're saying should not be a part of this collaborative. Certainly the collaborative's first effort is going to be on SIM, but that certainly, you know, it is an area where right now we're taking SIM from the lens of high fidelity simulation and technology enhanced simulation with mannequins or virtual rooms. We could expand that later on, and certainly would be open to discuss the use of other techniques and technologies, whether that's virtual, you know, cases or multiple choice questions or other efforts. But right now, the curriculum is really focused on, as Becca mentioned, sort of the high frequency, I'm sorry, the low frequency, high severity type of cases.
Thank you. Well, exciting news. After all of that effort and hard work by everybody across the country, the book is ready and has been published thanks to our friends at Allium. So this is a free ebook that is accessible on their website. And there will be some links and a QR code in here too, where you guys can find that. Ultimately, we ended up with 16 cases. There was one case that had to do with a neonatal delivery that we also tried to add a congenital heart lesion mixed into. And the feedback from all of our peer reviewers was that it was a lot to cover in one case. And so the authors helped split that into 2 separate cases. The next thing I wanted to do was just give you all a tour of what one of the cases looks like in the book. So these are a few sort of screenshots just so you can see kind of how a case progresses and what kind of content is available in there. And I believe I grabbed shots from the CAH case, the congenital adrenal hyperplasia. And so every case will be a little bit different, but the format is very standard so that you can expect the same thing and know what you're going to get with each case. So there's a little introduction so you can get a sense before you even dig further in. Getting to the learning objectives, I bet a lot of you are looking at this and thinking, wow, that's way too many learning objectives for one simulation session, especially if I only have, 50 to 60 minutes. And we know that this was designed intentionally to have a large number of learning objectives that could be picked and choose from a bit. So if you are working with some early learners, you might choose to focus on specific learning objectives. If you're working with, 3rd or 4th year EM residents, you might be focusing on other objectives. If you're doing iterative cycles of these cases, you might focus on some things the first time through and some things the second time through. A few of the cases, and this is an example of one of them, also has a few optional learning objectives. And these really came from our peer reviewers running the case, usually with learners who were more advanced perhaps and got through the content of the case pretty quickly, and it was felt they needed a little bit more of a challenge. Anything that's optional does address learning objectives that were also identified during the Delphi. There'll be a list of critical actions. These simulations were not designed with the intent to be assessment-based simulations. So this is a list of critical actions to help guide facilitators through what we would expect the residents to perform, but were not created with the intent to be a test. There'll be a list of recommended supplies for each of the cases, including the mannequin-based resources, medications. Of course, things can be adapted at your own institutions based on resources you have. We've started to see these cases adapted into virtual simulations. There's lots of ways to do low fidelity simulation. There will be supporting files for each case, and I'll show some examples of that. If the case requires interpretation of x-rays or EKGs or clips of echoes, those have all been included for facilitators, so you don't have to go find your own. And the cases will come with labs as well. List of who we suggest should be participating or what roles should be filled during the simulation, both from a participant as well as a facilitator standpoint. Brief outlines and what we expect or what would be helpful for faculty to know prior to facilitating the simulation, as well as some suggestions about what the prerequisite knowledge baseline for the participating resident should be. We offer some case alternatives. So if residents fail to do one of the critical actions, what might be a turn in the case that's not otherwise outlined, or if you have more advanced learners, what are some other aspects that can be added to the case? They've all been mapped to the ACGME milestones, and each case also has the list of resources for additional reading. This one I noticed is a textbook and an article, but several of the cases also have online FOMED resources as well, such as a blog or a summary or a podcast. Getting to the case, anybody who's looked at MedEd portal simulation cases will recognize this outline. It's a pretty standard format, just so everybody's looking at the same thing. Realizing that your own simulation program may require different format, but at least this will have all the content that you can adapt to that form. And then as the case is lined out, you'll get a sense of sort of how many stages are expected and what we would hope EM resident to perform in each stage before it advances to the next stage. Your general exams to help program your mannequin and help facilitate. And then the way the cases are written out is really in this sort of 3-column, again, based off of MedEd portals template type format. So ideas of if a team does something, what is the response or not response or prompt, as well as sometimes some time-based changes in the case as well. So perhaps 3 minutes into the case, no matter what happens, the patient's going to start seizing. That will all be lined out there. Each stage tells you when to advance to the next stage until it progresses to the end. After that, there'll be a summary of the ideal scenario flow to kind of get a sense of like if everything worked perfectly, which of course it doesn't, and that's why we're doing training. But if it did, this is what it would look like. Some anticipated mistakes that we've seen from learners in the past or anticipate might happen, as well as some either prompts or some suggestions to the facilitator to help navigate those mistakes. And then I think one of the really important parts is the debriefing points. So this curriculum is intended to be implemented at emergency medicine residency programs across the country, and there might be variable knowledge base with the facilitators around some of the points or different people coming in to facilitate. And so we really made an effort that for every learning objective that was written, there are debriefing points at the end, which will serve as a refresher for anybody facilitating, as well as sort of a common language and framework for people using the curriculum. Examples of supporting files, so basic labs, and there'll be multiple values depending on the case and where in the case they were obtained. I didn't include any images, but EKGs, as I mentioned before, EKGs, chest x-rays, we have some really nice echo clips for some of the cases are all embedded within there. And then finally, it's important to us that we're continuing to collect feedback on these cases, both from the participants as well as the facilitators. And in order to help facilitate the feedback, we have links to a standardized survey as well as QR codes so that these can be distributed immediately after the simulations are implemented in order for us to continually receive feedback and improve these cases in an iterative process. I'll say currently they're in this ebook format. The ultimate plan is after several months to also publish them in a web-based format through Allium, and they will be more adaptable once they're in the online format. So any feedback we get now will really help us understand who's using these cases, how they're using them, and any improvements we might need to make on them. I know that.
Just a comment on that. So we have, some funding that has supported both the development of this book in collaboration with LEM, as well as a separate pocket of funding for the website. So one of the reasons that we started out with a process that we have now for the book was some concerns amongst the collaborative members about having the cases out in the public domain. I had less concerns about that than some others, particularly because this is used for formative assessment, not summative. But we see that the website would be a way to potentially augment these cases, potentially with even things like the pre-programmed scenarios or virtual resuscitation rooms or additional image files that might augment the scenarios, as well as allow for iterative improvement. So as opposed to Meta Portal, where there's some great content, but you'd have to submit a entire update and go through a formal process, that there can be sort of crowdsourcing of updated iterations.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll say that getting the ebook out there was really that first step. So much work has gone into this book, and we didn't want to have that, ultimate goal that's 5 years down the road and these cases never get out there. So this is definitely the first piece, and then we'll transition also to having more interactive cases down the line. This is just demonstrating, so in case you use standardized patients who maybe don't have the same medical vocabulary as your other facilitators, there are also supporting materials in there, kind of written from the ST standpoint, including, what to say and what not to say and how to respond to specific questions or comments or procedures or interventions. So that was a rapid tour of the book. There's 16 of those cases throughout, covering, again, all 30 of the content items that were determined to be must teach by simulation based on that modified Delphi. Here is a link to where the book is housed on ALAM, as well as a QR code as well, and we can throw that into the chat pretty easily. So I'm going to pause there. All our contact information will be there. And Michael or Mark, did you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I think I'll just jump in really quick. Do you want to keep sharing your screen, Becca, and then we don't have that transition to me bringing up my screen?
It's totally up to you. I can drive if you want to just tell me when to go forward.
That's perfect, I think. Thank you. A whole bunch of people have jumped on while we were going, so thank you for joining us. If you may have noticed, people are putting their contact information in the chat. I didn't set the webinar up properly so that we would get all that information, but if you could please leave your name and contact information in the chat if you would like to be contacted about the curriculum going forward, we will happily reach out to you. So thank you so much. So the next slide. So at this point in time, we have a curriculum, it's out there, and we would love it if you guys would use it, obviously. There are a lot of ways you can use this educationally. I listed it as the casual user. And there are people who are just gonna wanna use a case from time to time, and that would be great. There are people who might feel that we don't see a lot of pediatric trauma, so it makes a lot of sense for us just to use the pediatric trauma cases. Or there are other aspects of the curriculum you want to use, and there are some people who might want to use almost all of it or all of it as part of their educational resources for their residency. And we welcome all users. We don't want any one type of user. The big thing we really want is like your feedback. As Marc has said, this is not designed to be a static project. This is going to be a work in progress, and we welcome everyone's feedback, and we would like to, if the cases can be made better, we would like to make them better. If there is a potential for using this for developing more cases, again, this is part of what we would like to do. I put faculty development in here as a question mark because there's no reason these cases also can't be used for faculty and for training faculty. So if somebody's interested in approaching us for that aspect, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Marc and Becca, but I mean, I think that this would be a great opportunity for using this for faculty and or nursing development and training. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And these SIMs were also created to serve as interprofessional SIMs as well. Again, the content domains were really taken from the modified Delphi focusing on emergency medicine residency education, but we all know we don't practice by ourselves, we practice in teams. So definitely adaptable to other situations, including pediatric emergency medicine fellows or potentially peds residents, with the focus on why we developed this and our ultimate goal being emergency medicine residents.
So the next slide. One of the things we'd like to see, running the cases, it should be, we want to get more people involved in simulation, but we'd really like to see, program directors, associate program directors, and simulation directors trying to take the lead in that. We are, as a group, and sorry, I didn't add this to this slide, we are looking for volunteers to help implement the curriculum in a broader perspective nationally. So we will be sending out a follow-up email on this. And we would ideally love program directors and APDs to consider working with us to help implement this on a sort of national, potentially even international level as we go forward. Marc, anything to add?
Yeah, Mike, so just a couple comments there. So I think that just because sometimes words really can make a big difference. So I know that we said, here it says run by PD, APD, or SIM director, but I think our suggestion was that they're involved in sort of implementation locally and aware, with that longer term vision of this becoming a part of your ongoing annual curriculum and a part of curriculum across the country. I do see some comments in the chat box about individuals who've created curriculum, and many of the people in our collaborative had done that and created cases, and many of our collaborative entities, of those 10 entities, had their own pediatric curricula. The goal here and the effort is not that this is the Marc Auerbach or Becca Burns or Michael Falk curriculum. The goal is really a standard national curriculum. And the implementation phase of this work, which we're embarking on, really we're hoping to pass that baton from Jennifer's work on the Delphi, which was really more of the needs assessment and the initial current process, to Bekah, and then to a new individual that would lead the implementation phase. And really that individual would be leading a group. Some of those team members may be members that want to have participated in all phases. So we have people that participate in both the Delphi and the peer review process and the case development, but we also have people that have come on for only one part and stepped off for others. So really with the implementation phase, our goal is not only to get use of the curriculum, but to get feedback to iteratively improve, with the long-term vision of having a standard unified curriculum that is used across the country. So I do want to pause there and just sort of hear any comments or thoughts on that, because that is a vision that we've had to try to promote equity across programs, perhaps those with lots of access to peds emergency experts and or a really robust peds emergency curriculum, or those that maybe feel as though they don't have a peds go-to person, and probably that's actually the better target audience, and supporting them with the tools and the resources to ensure that their residents are adequately prepared and that their residency program sees this as a value added. But I see some chairmen, some program directors on there. So I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on that vision of, there's flexibility when you adapt it, but really, is this goal of saying, in 5 years, if all residencies could be completing the same set of cases, that will move the needle forward on pediatric emergency care in this country, because then many graduates will have completed a standardized curriculum. Is that something that people feel like is a reasonable goal, or is a bit off from where their residency is now and their approach to pediatrics is?
Hi. I'm not sure if you can hear me. My name is Shyla Quasi, and I'm in Pennsylvania. I am relatively new to simulation, and in any case, we did our very first virtual simulation a few weeks ago, last month, which was focused on PEDS emergencies. And I am working clinically right now, so unfortunately, I missed the first portion of the presentation. I think it's super interesting project, and I think many of our residents across the board are losing out on clinical experience, both from a pediatric standpoint and from an adult standpoint, because of EMR and all of these extra things that we have to teach in a very short period of time in 3 years. More and more requirements piled on by ACGME, but the whole duration of residency is still not changed. So we have to teach much more effectively and much more efficiently. And I think that's where simulation comes in. So I think this is a fantastic project. I'm interested to work collaboratively with the group.
Thank you, and great to have you. I put the link in the chat box for the curriculum, and based on your comment, I will just say that Sarah Fui, who developed the virtual resuscitation room, if you have not seen that, it's worth taking a look at. We are working to create all of the cases within there. We should have about 8 of the cases available in the virtual resuscitation platform in the next month, and then hopefully the next 8 cases in a few months after that. But this is to address some of the challenges in the up and down. You can do sim, you can't do sim.
And can I just add, Mark? So for those who jumped on late, we are recording this. It will be posted on YouTube. It will be posted on SAEM and Court, and it'll be made available for anyone who wants it now or later. Any other comments or questions from folks? All right. So, in future, as I mentioned, these are just the initial cases that we picked out. There's no reason we cannot develop and validate new cases going forward. We're very interested, obviously, since most of us are academic, in potentially using this to generate more educational research. And there's a lot of opportunities within this, not just, as I mentioned, for residents, but there's also faculty development. There's also things, teamwork, leadership, communication. There's a lot of possibilities for anybody who's interested in doing this, and we would love to help work with you and facilitate that. We have, as Marc mentioned, the procedural aspect of this is somewhat basic, and we would definitely be interested in looking at possible procedural training sessions going forward. And this would be a really interesting thing to look at. And it comes up again, I already mentioned it, but faculty development and possible research in that aspect would be really interesting. I think that kind of gets us up to where we are. And now I'd like just to open it up to everybody for questions, comments, and feedback.
So thanks, Michael. To communicate this is Marc again, to communicate some of the lessons learned over the past year, I would say that this is actually a nice tool to bring together what is sometimes a disparate pediatrics emergency group from a emergency medicine residency. It's at times something where those are really intertwined, as they are here at Yale. But I know I've heard from other sites that there's a whole group of Children's Hospital people that are really working on a very limited basis with the emergency medicine residents outside of their clinical shifts. And we feel that this, when and if that is the case, this this is a nice framework to say, hey, let's work on implementation of this effort together. But I would be really interested to hear from some of the program directors in the group, again, about this concept of, is, having 14 cases over a 3 or 4 year residency, or 16 cases or 25 cases or 3 cases sort of the right number. Our group came up with a number that we provided here. And, do you think that having a set of simulation cases based on the EM model that is part of your curriculum on a standing basis is something that really there's capacity for and ability to do?
I just want to say thanks, Marc and Mike and Becca, and like so many people involved in this. I remember when that Delphi started as an alert presentation at Inspire years ago, and just to see it grow from that idea, which initially it started as wanting to make a curriculum, and then realizing that we needed to break down silos and speak to all the stakeholders to work on something together. And now to see this culminating in this real collaborative effort that will continue to grow is truly exciting. So thank you, and thanks to everyone who's attended, because I hope that everyone here is going to participate in sort of the next version and testing it out, and keeping it a living, growing document. Very cool.
Thanks, David. I know it's hard for people to unmute when there's like so many participants on. As people are sort of thinking about how they might use this going forward, I'll just do an informal poll in the chat. I would love for people to put in how many pediatric-based simulations they do in a year with their residents currently, and how many they think they could do or that they think they should do.
Actually, while everyone's kind of putting those comments into the chat, one thing I was curious about with this audience is, I'm sure most of you have taken a look at the book already. I'm curious as to how you've decided to use the material in the book. Are some of you going to try to use all 16 cases, or are you going to pick out like 1 or 2 to use, or to already like add to your simulation? So I do want to hear a little bit about that too.
So it's great to see that there's many people already doing pediatric simulation, and I think that what was just mentioned was, that this is not an all or none, that doing pediatric simulations and these cases seem to be complementary, and or even the cases you have could potentially lead to improvement in these cases. That would be one approach. If sites are willing within the implementation phase, we're hoping to get a cohort of emergency medicine residencies that are willing to implement the entirety of the curriculum over the 3 or 4 year residency, and begin to understand the impact of that. And it's really wild to see the range in the chat box of 10 to 40 to 3. So interesting to see that many programs are, it looks like most of the respondents are doing pediatric simulations, but there's quite a variability in how that's being executed.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. As a former sim director in an EM residency, it is always hard to get time to do any simulation, given the competing educational needs for residents and everything else you're doing. So the fact that everyone's getting so much sim and is just phenomenal. Well done.
I had a question. My name is Kristen Delaney. I am a PEM attending at Stony Brook Medical Center. I apologize if you can't hear me. I just left my clinical shift and I'm driving home, so it might be a little choppy. And I apologize if you've already addressed this, but I have encountered a little bit of difficulty in the COVID era running sims with our simulation department being closed and kind of some, social distancing things that need to be set up. And I was wondering if you guys had any suggestions or any kind of experience having run these sims, since, over the past year.
Yeah, so this is Marc. We have our annual EM Sim Day every year. We usually do one procedural day and one case-based day, and then we do weekly sims throughout. But we have decided that for this year we kept postponing, but we're going to do our case-based simulations using this curriculum on virtual resuscitation room platform. So we are in the process of getting those 8 cases out of the 16 that we'll conduct in 2 Wednesday morning conference sessions. Certainly I think that there's a benefit to having the in-person and psychomotor aspects, and we're taking out some of those peds intubations and other things. But our group, while we don't have it in the book yet, the virtual resuscitation room platform with some of the labs, some of the images and other things is a way that we're going to trial, and hopefully if the feedback's positive, we will encourage other people to do that.
Yeah, we've struggled here with having to implement in-person sims, but smaller groups. So going through either shorter cases and or with fewer learners. And I think one of the benefits of each case having this really robust list of learning objectives is you can really titrate those down to a few depending on your time, your group size, or your platform. Because as I mentioned before, some of the objectives won't be achievable as are written or intended with virtual format, but there are plenty in each case that can be.
And we've been using something pretty easy that's PowerPoint based. I'm not familiar with the virtual recess room, but I would imagine it looks somewhat similar with, medications and interventions that you can pull and, easy ways to sort of build in jumping to labs, jumping to imaging, et cetera. And we've had pretty good success with that because our simulation center has been 100% closed. We were not allowed to navigate that with smaller groups or distancing or anything.
Just as a quick plug, we got a paper accepted to academic emergency medicine and training on theoretical issues looking at education in the COVID era, given physical distancing and the other limitations. And they requested a follow-up paper with actual specific examples. So hopefully that'll come out soon. And I will say that SAEM 2021, there's at least 4 workshops that have been accepted on various aspects of simulation in COVID and based on physical distancing and all that sort of stuff. And I don't know, Mike, I'm not sure if Court has stuff like that coming up, but there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline coming up on these issues.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot in the pipeline as far as just abstracts being submitted of how people have been trying to either do something a little bit different with simulation during the COVID era. And, we see it then too. But yeah, I think with the upcoming CORD conference, I think we're going to see a lot of abstracts and a lot of poster presentations and how people have been doing alternate forms of simulation during the era. And like us, I think a lot of programs have their simulation centers closed.
Yeah, so Senna, to comment on what was just listed in the chat box of adult standardized patients or actors to play the role of parents, absolutely. So we do have a standardized patient script and a parent in most, if not all, the cases. So that script is pretty elaborate. And if you take a look at the book, that certainly would be very effective with a professional actor, could be done with a technician, or, I know some programs will use other residents because they might not have have the standardized patients. And I again want to highlight that our goal for this work may be the individuals not on this call. So it is, really trying to get all residency programs to have a minimum set of pediatric experiences beyond just saying 25% of time. I think that, the use of lower technology mannequins, the use of non-professional actors or colleagues as actors, totally very reasonable to consider, and this could and should be flexible. I did have a question for William and or others that have mentioned the idea of use for faculty development. I sort of see two components of faculty development. One is with the faculty serving as facilitators and boosting their pediatric skills and simulation skills. The other, I just wanted to clarify, are you referring to potentially faculty participating in the curriculum? Both. Okay. Yeah, I think it could work. It certainly could work for both. This is heavily mapped out to the ABEM and EM miles, the EM model. Certainly, I would say those things should be in line. And I think that if I look at the curriculum, they are in line with what would be, probably very useful for faculty for continuing their pediatric experience and training. I don't know if any sites have done that to date, not that I'm aware of, but we do some simulations with our faculty in the general EM, and I hadn't thought about it until you just mentioned it. So it's a great idea to consider using the same cases.
I just wanted to circle back to the question about the SP too, that I think they're very valuable, and depending on what you want your objective focus for that case to really be. So all 16 of these cases have SP scripts, and you could focus on having that, detailed conversation, gathering history. How do you talk about challenging diagnosis with the family for every case, but that might not be the objective you're focusing to emphasize each time. And so depending on your resources and your needs for that sim, you might be using a facilitator. You could use a facilitator who maybe is not going to provide as much back and forth versus a case where you really want to focus on that interpersonal communication where you might need an SP. And just to comment on the faculty development, in my division, pediatric emergency medicine here at Children's, we do faculty interprofessional sims once a year. Everybody's required to do one. And I think that these would be great resources for that as well. Again, with the lens that these were developed for emergency medicine residents, but obviously have a broad reach.
And part of the reason the cases were so detailed was not to be prescriptive in how you use them, but to facilitate sites that maybe don't have as much simulation. So for people who are relatively novice simulators, was to make sure that we provided you with as much information as possible so that you would feel comfortable using this. And from my standpoint, that's one of the ways I see that junior faculty can use this to hopefully help with guidance and to develop their own simulation educational skills.
So we really appreciate, it looked like we had like 57 people at one time, and we appreciate everyone's participation. They're dropping like flies now, we're down to 50. But 2 calls for arms. One will be download and consider looking at this, providing feedback, consider running a case. And the other would be if you are on the line and you are a program director or associate program director or no one that you feel may be interested, or if you're interested in leading the implementation phase, there's is a time commitment, and we'll have a letter and a call for that coming out. And we know everyone's incredibly busy, but this hopefully would be an opportunity for really improving care, as well as a number of different scholarship opportunities. That implementation lead, after being identified, will work with our group to then have a call for members of the implementation team. So similar to the curriculum development team and the Delphi team. With the Delphi team and curriculum development team, we actually had way too many people respond, and we had to sort of set some guardrails on how many people could participate. I would say with the implementation team, we do have a bit more flexibility and focus in terms of emergency medicine residency programs, as opposed to with the Delphi and other processes where we included the Pediatric Trauma Society, multiple simulation societies, multiple other pediatric organizations. So my sense is that SAEM and CORD and EMRA and some of the other ED-oriented sim groups really can help us to make sure that we are appropriately implementing and that our strategies fit their needs. So if you know someone, if you are someone that is on the call right now, feel free to drop any of us an email, but there will be that official call coming out looking for the lead implementation individual. If you have a really cool name for that, please let us know. Chief Implementation Officer, Director of Dissemination. We're trying to come up with a catchy name that fits Rebecca's Chief Editor title.
Any other questions or comments people wanted to either unmute for or drop in the chat? I'm happy to address here. I think you have our contact information, or I can move to it.
Just as a plug for those considering doing the implementation phase, from an academic development standpoint and a career standpoint, this sort of stuff is not only beneficial to EM as a whole, but it's incredibly beneficial to your career when it comes to promotion. And it's a really valuable experience, I'll say. I mean, I know Marc has done tons of stuff at the national level, same with Michael and other folks here. It's a very valuable resource, and it's always fascinating to work with a large group of people.
And while I have contact information up, I'll just have to thank again for everyone, all of the authors, the peer reviewers. I see some of you guys on this phone call who worked so hard and stuck to some pretty strict deadlines to get this book done, and especially to my associate editors. But most importantly to Sam, who I could not have done anything without. So thank you so much, Sam.
Very welcome. It's a pleasure.
All right, so I think we will give permission for drop off. And if anyone has any questions, I see a number of people, some people have direct messaged. Please feel free to stay on, particularly if you have about the implementation lead or any other aspects. And thank you guys for all you're doing. We had you making this 3 minutes during these crazy times is a huge ask. So thank you so much.